we'll lose our lives. We'll lose our real lives into the digital ether because these realities are so deeply addictive.
Too much, not enough, or exactly the right amount. How much joy would you say that you experience in your life right now, alumni? My guess is that none of us would say too much joy, and more than likely, most of us would say that there's more room for joy in this life after graduation. I think our conversation today can help with that. We're tagging on one last episode to this faith transition series. It's my conversation with Jay Kim from a couple years ago, and Jay talks about the way that comparison, specifically as a result of over-consuming social media, can lead to a serious joy deficit. But he also has a solution for us, and that solution comes through rooting ourselves deeply in the goodness of God and cultivating the fruit of the Spirit in our daily lives. And Jay is going to help us get started with that today. Welcome to After 4, your podcast for navigating life after graduation. I'm your host and guide, John Steele, and this one's for you, alumni. Hey, Jay, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad to be on.
We're going to spend some time talking about your book, Analog Christian, Cultivating Contentment, Resilience, and Wisdom in the Digital Age. And the book itself and its content, I think, is especially interesting. I'm sure I'm not the first person to say this, given where you live and the water that you're swimming in. It seems particularly interesting, pertinent. But before we dive in, Jay, would you just take a moment to introduce yourself, help me and the rest of our audience get to know you a little bit?
Yeah, my name is Jay Kim, and like I said earlier, I have been here in the Silicon Valley for basically my entire life. Moved around a lot as a kid, but have been here. And I'm a follower of Jesus. Have been I grew up going to church, but had a sort of season of deconstruction, which sadly is quite common now. But
yes.
Had a season of deconstruction my freshman, sophomore years of college. But thankfully, the Lord sort of, drew me back by his good grace. And since my early 20s have at least tried, stumbled and tried to faithfully follow Jesus. And and I've been a pastor, a local church pastor since my early 20s. Was a youth pastor, a youth and college ministry pastor for about a decade, and then helped plant a church, and then spent some time as a teaching pastor, and now leading a community that I love right here in Silicon Valley.
That's awesome. What a story, and what a hopeful reminder for, there's probably many of us that are experiencing some level of deconstruction or closely tied to people who are. And to know that there's hope. There's hope to be held onto in the midst of those stories of being drawn back into the arms of Jesus, and that's awesome. I love that. Jay, do you have a history with InterVarsity as a college student, or are these couple of titles that you've written with IVP? Was that your introduction to a relationship with InterVarsity?
Yeah, I mean, I've known of InterVarsity for a really long time. I remember in high school going to an Urbana conference, Urbana Missions Conference, and obviously, InterVarsity is very deeply, intricately tied there, and so I mean, throughout my life, there were these moments where Ivy had this beautiful, profound impact on me, and then for many years, once I became a pastor, I've benefited greatly from so many InterVarsity Press books, so awesome. The ministry has had a profound impact on my life, but there was because I was deconstructing, I was never a part of a college campus ministry or anything like that. But the ministry of InterVarsity on a number of levels has had a profound impact on my life. And then I've had friends in recent years who were doing a lot of work with IV. And then, my first real familial connection was these last two books, that I had the privilege and joy of working on with the crew at InterVarsity. So it's been a joy.
Well, hey, let's start to shift our focus towards analog Christian here. Can you give us just a brief overview of the book and what it was that prompted you to write it in the first place?
Yeah, the book is I've told people this before. Really, it's a prayer. It's like a long
Hmm.
50,000 word prayer.
That's awesome.
It's a very, I wrote another book a few years ago called Analog Church, and
Yes.
Analog Christian is sort of a follow up. But Analog Church, I would say, I wrote it with primarily, the first book was primarily with church leaders and pastors in mind.
Sure.
But this book, Analog Christian, one, it's far more personal. It
Hmm.
was again a prayerful response to some things I was sort of seeing in my own life,
Hmm.
and in particular the ways in which I was coming undone because of my own digital addictions and
Yeah.
my own sort of constant, incessant, nonstop desire to reach for my back pocket at any
Yes.
moment of boredom.
Yes.
And I had a very strong sense this is not the life God has for me,
Hmm.
nor for anybody. And what I'm not saying is like, cell phones are the devil or
Right.
something. That's, smartphones are, the great
Yes.
enemy of God. That's not what I'm saying. It's actually not really primarily even a you know, a I'm not critiquing digital technology on the whole. Really, what it's about is the human condition
Hmm.
and the ways in which the addictive nature of various technological realities in our lives, if we are not thoughtful, if we are not intentional with our lives, we'll lose our lives. We'll
Yes.
lose our real lives into the digital ether because these realities are so deeply addictive
Hmm.
and intentionally so.
Yes.
That's sort of the bottom line for a lot of social media companies in particular, is to keep us scrolling and swiping and clicking. So I wrote the book because I was thinking about and wrestling with in my own life, my own sort of journey.
Hmm.
And I found a lot of hope in uh Paul's words in Galatians 5, the famous passage about the fruit of the spirit.
Yes.
I've known that passage and had that passage memorized for years, but it wasn't until I began looking at it again through the lens of my own struggle
Hmm.
that I realized, oh, this is it. This is the antidote to so
Yes.
much that is coming undone in me, because of my digital addictions.
Yes. And that's something that I really love about Analog Christian is rather than just focusing on the problem and giving, hey, here's 3 simple steps for being more analog, that you really do take what feels to me like in the world of positive psychology, that you're not just focusing on unhealth and rooting out bad things and like this is the problem, let's really demonize the problem and get rid of it, that you really spend time spotlighting the healthy pursuit instead. And
Yeah.
I love that about this book is that, like you said, it doesn't feel like this is just sort like a witch hunt sort of book, that it feels like this is our unhealthy reality that we live in, but there is a healthy alternative and a healthy pursuit, and let's turn our eyes towards that. Sort of a whatever is lovely, whatever is noble, think about
Yeah.
these things, that feels like the encouragement that you're giving in this book. And as you already have explained, that the fruit of the spirit and fruit growing on a tree to me is like what's more analog than fruit growing on a tree? Like that's just like so real life. I love that's the model that you used for outlining your book. And since you've already spoken to that, I won't dig any further necessarily into that question. But so we're going to focus in on two chapters as best as we can. We'll see what time allows for here, and that's joy instead of comparison and self-control instead of reckless indulgence. That's chapters 2 and 8 respectively. So let's jump into joy instead of comparison. As I already said, you don't live in the stats, you don't just dwell on the problems around these topics, but you also don't shy away from them. So, before we get too far into this topic, can you just help ground us in reality a little bit? Can you share some information that helps us get a handle on the problem surrounding comparison and social media in particular?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we can, yeah, let's talk comparison.
Yeah.
But I think the build up to that's really important because I think we have to embrace our actual reality and
Mm.
not our sort of preferred reality. So, some of the data, 84% of Americans admit, these are the ones who admit it, by the
Yes.
way,
Gosh.
84% admit that they could not go one full day without their smartphone.
Wow.
So I think the reality of those who actually can't go a full day is much higher than 84%
Mm.
because I think we often deceive ourselves.
Yeah.
They've done some of the math. Social media users will spend, if you average it out over the average lifespan, social media users will spend more than 5 years, 5 full years on social media. 5 full years of your life.
And
You
you say
know,
this is the average. This is the average
the
user,
average. Yeah,
which
this
means
is
that
the
they're
average.
significantly higher.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. The average smartphone user spends more than 3 hours a day on their phone. So you think about how many waking hours you have. Let's say you sleep 8 hours a day, you're awake for 16. 3 out of 16, that's like almost a fifth of your day
yeah.
on your phone. And, the average Apple actually released this stat a couple of years ago. The average smartphone user or iPhone user unlocks their phone 150 times a day. You just, that's an addictive tick, the
Yes.
need to constantly swipe it open.
Yes.
So that's important to establish. We are on our phones more than we think we are for
Yep.
most people.
Absolutely.
And so what is happening there? Well, primarily, especially for those listening, I think, kind of post college, generationally speaking, that generation, our generation, we are on our phones more than most.
Yes.
And what the research is showing, in particular, when it comes to social media and even parts of news media, it is having a significant adverse effect on our mental health and
Mm.
on our well-being, much of it fueled by unhealthy levels of comparison that sort
Mm.
of bubble up to the surface when you spend an inordinate amount of time on social media. So, as an example, a few years ago, the University of Pennsylvania did a pretty significant study where researchers were measuring levels of anxiety, depression, loneliness, and then FOMO, the fear of missing out,
Yes.
as well as a new sort of term that I think is fascinating called FOBO,
Yes.
which is a fear of better options,
Yes.
And they started studying all of this, and they had all sorts of ways of studying how social media use was impacting and influencing levels of anxiety, depression, loneliness, FOMO, and FOBO. And unsurprisingly, they found that over a 3-week period, they had two groups, and participants who intentionally limited their use of social media felt significantly reduced levels of all of those things. Way
Wow.
less anxiety, way less depression, way less loneliness, way less FOMO and FOBO. And this was across the board with hundreds and hundreds of participants in each group. A university in Canada several years ago did actually a very famous, now well-known study where they asked 120 college women to sort of remove Facebook and Instagram, and then measured over the course of several weeks, measured their feelings about their own appearance.
Hmm.
And long story short, what they discovered was that simply by reducing or eliminating use of Facebook and Instagram, no longer scrolling their feeds, they began to feel increased levels of satisfaction with their own
Wow.
physical bodies, and nothing else had changed. It's
Wow.
not like they had, exercised more or worn
Right.
more makeup or dressed, like nothing else had changed. So I share some of that data, and there's like countless examples like this. I share that data simply to say, um, comparison is often the albatross. It is the thing that weighs us down. It's not even reality as we are living and experiencing it.
Right.
It is that we so often view life through the lens of other people's feeds.
Mm-hmm.
And it's killing us. I mean, it is literally killing us when you think about some of the data on, suicidal ideation that a lot of young people have, because not totally because, but in large part due to the sort of comparison monster that is whispering these lies to us that we'll never make it. We don't measure up. We're not good enough. Look at all of these other people. When in reality, on the other side of that digital screen, all these other people whose feeds look perfect, they're wrestling with the same exact thing.
Yes.
And at some point, we need to remove those filters that are dividing us and be real with one another. So yeah, for me, I'm not 25, I'm in my early 40s, but even for me, it's a reality. And so freeing ourselves, allowing God by his Spirit to free us from the comparison game is a critically important sort of step toward living with joy in Jesus.
Yes. It reminds me a little bit of this thing that I remember studying when I was in the world of psychology, and that was the idea of the invisible audience. That especially in your adolescent years, you have this idea that like everybody is looking at you. And sort of nitpicking everything that you do, and that everybody notices me. And honestly, I still have this feeling as a homeowner in my backyard that all of my neighbors are watching me when I'm out there critiquing my every move, or the things that I'm doing or not doing. And now, like, you have these devices that put that on a global scale of wondering, like, who's looking at me, who's not looking at me, who's fill in the blank is better than mine, and at the same, as you said, at the same time, those people are dealing with the exact same thing. They're wondering the same thing. But now, rather than it just being, the people in my neighborhood, I see at face value their experiences, but I have no insight into their reality or what they're putting out as their reality.
Yeah.
Now, because of these phones, we have access to all of that insider information, whether it's real or not. At a global scale in a way that we just didn't. And so the opportunity for comparison has skyrocketed so dramatically. It's insane, the number of people that you can compare yourself to now, and the data, real or not, that you have to back up your thoughts about that.
Yeah, that's right. Human beings as embodied creatures, to your point, we were not made to live as embodied creatures who are sort of pulled into the ether of a disembodied reality. And that tension it breaks us. You know what I mean? So I'm sitting here in my office, but I can open my phone and begin to scroll Instagram and just see all of my friends and the wonderful time they're having on their European vacation. And my other friend who's sitting on the beach in the Maldives, having a drink or whatever. And I'm physically here in my little office. And it's what I'm not saying is like, you should never look at a photo of your friend on their vacation. Every now and then, that's fine. It's fair enough. If you're healthy and you're in a position where you just celebrate, like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that Bobby's getting a little getaway. He's been working so hard, whatever. But it's the constant scrolling. It's the constancy of the feed. That is really destroying us, because you do that long enough and you just begin to believe that is what life should look and sound and feel like all the time. And then you live in the sort of embodied reality of your actual life. And it's not that, to your point, I just think we're not meant to live that way. It's destructive. And the fuel for all of that is comparison. And we need to stop. We need to weigh out.
Yes. Well, then let's talk about the way out. The way out that you would suggest is the flip side, living into joy. So help us, Jay, understand what is joy, just so we're on the same page. But then also, what is it not? so that we know like what to not bring into the fold here when we're thinking about pursuing joy?
Yeah. Yeah. Joy, it's interesting. I think most of us, we use the word joy and happiness or pleasure
Yes.
all sort of synonymously,
Yes.
and that's what happens in a feel good culture. And that's what we live in. We live in a culture that is all about feeling good.
Mm-hmm.
Or, but biblically speaking, joy is not that, right? Like, in the Hebrew scriptures in the Old Testament, there are a variety of Hebrew words for that are translated into the English word joy in various biblical translations. But the most common one is the Hebrew word simha.
Mm.
It shows up almost 100 times in the Old Testament.
Wow.
And simha is not primarily about feeling good. It's primarily about, in the Bible at least, it's almost always used to describe a person or a group of people, their sort of state of being, specifically when they are with or in the presence of God.
Hmm.
So why that's important is that, at least biblically speaking, it seems to indicate that joy is actually not contingent upon circumstances or situations,
Hmm.
but that joy, simha, is actually contingent upon nearness to God. So a couple of
Wow.
examples, like Psalm 16, the writer says, "In your presence, there is fullness of simha, joy."
Hmm.
In your presence, in God's presence, there is the
Yes.
fullness of joy. There's that famous Psalm 30, where the psalmist writes, "God, you turn my wailing into dancing.
Hmm.
You removed my sackcloth, which was emblematic of sadness and suffering. You removed that, and you instead clothed me with simha, with joy."
Wow.
Which, if you think about it, that's like a confrontation to the cultural rendering of joy.
Yes.
That joy is like happiness, good times, feeling good, pleasure.
Right.
Well, no. Like, this verse is about wailing. It's
Yeah.
about a sackcloth, which is emblematic again of sadness. And the writer says, no, like, because I am near you, because I am with you, you can take my wailing, my sadness, my brokenness, and turn it into dancing. You actually replace the cloth of my sadness,
Hmm.
and you clothe me with joy. So the reason that's important is, if we believe that joy is always circumstantial and situational, that joy is something I have to manufacture by making sure I feel good, I'm
Hmm.
having a good time, then it is impossible for joy to be pervasive and constant. It's
Hmm.
impossible. So joy, in that understanding, life will always be a roller coaster of joy and sadness and brokenness. What's hard about that is life is a roller coaster. So
Yes.
there's no way around it. Life, by its nature, brings good times and bad times and long, steady plateaus of just the mundane and the boring.
Right.
And if joy is dictated by the roller coaster, there's no way to live a life of joy.
Hmm.
A life of joy means that your entire life is couched in and foundationally built upon joy. So if joy is happiness and pleasure and feeling good, which is circumstantial and situational, then you can't possibly live a life of joy. You
Right.
just live a life where you are pursuing moments of joy.
Yes.
But what the scriptures seem to indicate is that no, a life of joy is possible. You think about the writer of Hebrews when they say that Jesus, for the joy set before him,
Hmm.
endured the cross. That literally makes no sense if
Right.
joy is circumstantial and situational.
Hmm.
There's no way that you can achieve pleasure or good feelings when you are about to go die on a cross.
Right.
It's not possible. And yet the scriptures seem to indicate it is possible, because he did that for the joy set before him.
Hmm.
So, what is joy? I've talked a lot right now about what joy isn't, but I love Dallas Willard's thought. He says in a book called The Allure of Gentleness, Dallas Willard says, joy is not a passing sensation of pleasure, like we
Hmm.
just talked about, but joy is a pervasive sense of well-being that's infused with hope because of the goodness of God. And that's the key phrase. Joy, biblical joy, and a life of joy comes about when we sense in our nearness to God that he is good and that will never change, that his goodness and his loving grace toward us is unceasing and it is constant and it is consistent in the midst of life's ups and downs. So for me, that definition and sort of understanding joy in that sense has been tremendously helpful.
Yes, it's that that recognition that that Jesus is our constant, that God, our Creator, is constant, and therefore, as life has its ups and downs, that we have that homeostasis through all of it. That is God. That when my life takes a total downturn and I crash and burn and fill in the blank thing, I remember that this is not what defines my life. I remember that this too shall pass, just like the next great thing that I experience, that too shall pass.
Yes.
But that through all of it, God is stable, his promises to be faithful and to redeem us and to draw us to him and to bring all things under the authority of Jesus Christ, that will happen and that we're good because of that. Like, obviously, we're still learning how to follow Jesus well, how to look more like him, and there's ebbs and flows with all of those things, but that he is constant and that our hope is secure in that reality and not in my own health, the way that I look, the way that I feel. And yes, that feels so totally different. And I think if I'm reading your book correctly, Jay, I think that you're even saying that those really challenging moments in between are actually fuel for joy. They're not just the things that we sort of like, that we grit our teeth and get through because we have joy, but that those things are actually useful for fueling the joy that we have. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the like #blessed and the struggle that leads to joy?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I love John's gospel. Jesus in John's gospel in chapter 16, he's got that famous line. He says, in this world, you will have trouble. What a sobering line. Yeah, we typically just kind of like skim over that part of it because the second part is so awesome. But the first part, I think we just need to sit in it for a while. This is Jesus talking. This is not like, you know, some pastors. Jesus himself says, he acknowledges, like, no, it's going to be hard. Like, life will bring you trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. Inferring, I have overcome the world and all of its troubles. Not that you will not have trouble, but when you have trouble, take heart, because that trouble will not overcome me. Therefore, if you are with me, it will not overcome you. Like you just said, this too shall pass is essentially what he's saying. So, you know, Henry Nouwen, the great writer Henry Nouwen, he says that joy and sorrow are never separated, right? Which is so anti the version of joy or happiness or pleasure that culture wants to sell us. It's all about separating ourselves from sorrow and pain and hardship and inconvenience. But Nouwen says, taking Jesus's words here to heart, you know, joy and sorrow are never separated. Joy is hidden in sorrow and sorrow in joy.
Wow.
Which is so interesting. And then Nouwen goes on, he says, if we try to avoid sorrow at all costs, we may never taste joy.
Wow.
Which is like so beautiful, profound. The late, great Tim Keller, I think he sort of expounds on this idea. He's got this wonderful book called Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering. And he explains it this way in that book. He says that other worldviews, non-Christian worldviews, they lead us to sit in the midst of life's joys, foreseeing the coming sorrows. So other worldviews are all about, hey, like, feel good now, enjoy this now, but there's some bad stuff coming. It's going to be a bummer, but whatever. Let's just have a good time right now.
Right.
But then Keller goes on and he says, but Christianity, the way of Jesus, empowers its people to sit in the midst of this world's sorrows, tasting in the present the coming joy.
Yeah.
Right? The promise that someday Christ is going to return and right all wrongs and set the world right and usher in a whole new era, an eternal forever kingdom of real joy. And we can taste that joy now in the midst of all of our pain. So, you know, if you type in the hashtag blessed on Instagram or whatever, it's never sorrow. It's never pain. It's never hardship. It's always a Mai Tai on the beach, or like the brand new car or whatever. Yes. And I'm not saying those things are bad. I'm just saying we have a misunderstanding of what the blessed life actually is. That blessing is like real blessing is not feeling good. Real blessing is the ability to have joy deep in our body and bones in the midst of pain and suffering and sorrow. That's real blessing. You know, you think about the Beatitudes, Jesus's wonderful words that sort of kick off his great Sermon on the Mount. And all of those different types of people he says are blessed, especially within the context of the day, those were not the blessed, you know, those are not the people who at the time in the world at the time in the cultural context of the day, those are not the people others looked at and said, wow, they're living the good life. That's not it. You know, the poor, the meek, you know, like, so I think that it's critically important that we understand what blessing really looks like, that it is the ability to live in and alongside the presence of a good God in the midst of our pain and know that his goodness never wavers. And in that truth, we find a deep sort of underpinning of joy that becomes the foundation of our lives rather than a sort of fleeting spark of pleasure that we're constantly chasing.
Yeah. Wow. Jay, then can you, I mean, this is ultra inspiring as I'm listening to this, and that feels like an easy place then to just stop, is to feel inspired. Like, yes.
Right.
Can you give us just one practical next step for pursuing joy instead of comparison?
Yeah, so many, but one that I think all of us can do right away is to take some and consider, reflect on one simple from God in your life that is constant. So there's one that everyone listening to this has that's universal. It's the breath in your lungs. And it sounds a little trite, but you know, you think about it in the scriptures, the word for spirit, you know, the Spirit of God in both the Hebrew and the Greek, ruach in Hebrew and pneuma in Greek, both words mean wind or breath. And so for Christians, for followers of Jesus, it's a reminder that every breath we take, you know, as the Spirit of God resides within us, every breath we take is a reminder of the energizing, animating Spirit of God that is with us and in us. So that's one thing we could all be grateful for, to take 30 seconds of your day, to take some very deep breaths in and out, and thank God with every breath, you know. Breath prayers are something I practice pretty regularly. And for those who are unfamiliar, breath prayers are exactly what they sound like. They are simple, very short prayers you recite consistently over the course of a day or a month or years, while taking a few breaths. So one of my most recent breath prayers has been that God, you control outcomes. So I'll spend like 30 seconds throughout the day, several times in a day, sitting on the sofa in my office, eyes closed, feet firmly planted on the ground, and just taking deep breaths in. And then on my exhale, I'll just pray, God, you control outcomes, right? God, you control outcomes, right? My calling is just to be faithful. And I'll do that a few times a day. And it infuses me with gratitude and with joy, you know, knowing that God's in control, I'm not, and all he's asking of me is to be faithful. And so that's one thing we can do. is to just take a moment out of your day, pick something ordinary in your life that is a gift from God, and thank Him for it. And it has a powerful way of putting everything into perspective.
Let's run back one thing Jay shared with us. Biblical joy and a life of joy comes about when we sense in our nearness to God that He is good and that will never change, that His goodness and His loving grace toward us is unceasing, and it is constant and it is consistent in the midst of life's ups and downs. If you're experiencing a joy deficit, alumni, especially if that deficit comes from an unhealthy comparison of your post-graduation experience to that of your friends, or just from comparing reality to what you thought reality would be, remember that in the presence of God, there is fullness of joy, and we have access to that joy in the good, the bad, and the boring, because we live daily in the presence of God. If you need help living daily in the presence of God and being rooted in His goodness, DM the word examine to After4Pod on Instagram, and we'll send you some resources that will help. You can find a link to that in the show notes. All right, we're going to take a 2-week break, alumni, and then we will be back after that with more great episodes to help you keep navigating this post-graduation season of life. Until then, consider sharing this episode with someone who needs to hear it, and I will see you in the after, alumni. Thanks for listening to After 4. This podcast is brought to you by the InterVarsity Alumni Relations Team, hosted and produced by John Steele, production assistance by Mike Centera, edited by Caleb Leppert, and our After 4 theme music was written and performed by John Steele.